Run, river, run, run through the hills. Run, river, run to the sea. Run, river, run to your place beneath the sun. Run, river, run over me.
Hello, this is Jan Lewis. Welcome back to Be My Guest. We have today from Nashua, New Hampshire, Stephen Edington, and he is the author of, well, there's a book about Jack Kerouac. I knew the name, but I couldn't place who he was, and Stephen's going to tell us all about it. It's called Kerouac's Nashua Connection, and it's his background of his family. We'll talk about that. The other one is The Beat Face of God. Maybe some of you out there remember the Beat generation that came just before the Boomers, all right? Welcome, Jack. No, Jack. Welcome, Steve.
Jack, unfortunately, is long gone.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Steve would have been 100, right?
Jack would have been 100.
I'm going to get these two names. Jack would have been 100 by now.
Right, yes. He was born on March the 12th of 1922. So this is the centennial year of his birth. He was born over in Lowell, Massachusetts.
Tell us, people out there, maybe they understand the name, but they don't know who was Jack.
Okay, Jack Kerouac was he came to be more recognized after his passed away than during his lifetime. Yeah. But he's now considered to be a fairly prominent American novelist. He was born in Lowell, Massachusetts, as we were just saying, 100 years ago in March. He was raised in Lowell. His parents were French Canadian, so his ancestry is French Canadian. Grew up in French Canadian working class families or neighborhoods in Lowell. Mm-hmm. He was also he was very athletic, so he had a lot of football prowess about him. Yeah. And so after he graduated from Lowell High School, he got a football scholarship to Columbia University, which suddenly pulls him out of these working class French Canadian neighborhoods in Lowell. Yeah. And here he is on the Upper West Side of New York going to Columbia University.
What did he major in?
I think he was going to probably either history, literature. The thing is, he didn't last too long there. But it was when he was in New York that he met up with people like Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs.
Was it Ellen Woo Ginsberg?
Yeah,
I've heard the name, but yeah, okay.
Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, other people who came to form the nucleus or the core of what later came to be termed the Beat Generation. Yeah. Beat Generation was really a name for the generation that came of age either during or immediately after World War II. And so Kerouac was part of that crowd. The counterpoint name, the generation that came of age after World War I, is usually referred to as the Lost Generation.
Were our parents, weren't they the greatest generation? No, they were
World War II. That was Tom Brokaw's term for the men and women who fought in the Second World War.
Yeah, right.
Beat Generation was Kerouac's term for the generation that was coming of age after World War II.
And then the Boomers.
And the Boomers are post-World War II as well. I'm a Boomer.
Korea, right?
What's that?
And Korea. The Korean War.
Second World War and Korea, yeah. But to get back to your question, so Jack Kerouac, he wrote the novel that kind of put him in the spotlight was one called On the Road, which he wrote about 4 cross-country trips he took between 1947 and 1950. That got onto the bestseller lists around 1957 and allowed him then to get a lot of his other works published. But 5 of his novels really are focused on his growing up days over in Lowell during the 1920s and 30s. And they captured very well sort of the ethos of Lowell at that time, especially its French Canadian or Franco-American communities.
Lowell is?
So,
Lowell is French Canadian?
Well, Lowell is a working class town. It had a lot of different ethnic folks there. There was the French Canadians, the Greeks, the Irish. Now it's Cambodians, Vietnamese. Lowell is the city that has the first city of any size to have a Cambodian mayor now. I mean that's
really
the
cool.
way things
That's
have gone.
Great. That's great. Yeah.
But so Kerouac, you can divide his writings essentially into 2 categories. They're his Lowell-based novels, the 5 novels he wrote about being in Lowell during the 20s and the 30s. And then there's what you call the road novels, which are the ones about his travels all around.
Was he in a VW bus?
No, he didn't. I don't know if he ever owned a car. He did a lot of hitchhiking, riding buses, hopping freight trains.
Safe back then, though,
you could do that.
Yeah.
So he kind of captured the mood On the Road and some of his other novels. I think he kind of captured a kind of searching, questing, looking for what are some of the meanings of our life now in the aftermath of the Second World War. That was what his novels kind of captured that tone. And in a way, he was the precursor. He didn't mean it this way. In fact, he was surprised that it happened. But in a way, some of his writings, particularly on the road, and a book he wrote called The Dharma Bums, which is about his excursions into Buddhism. Even though he was raised Catholic, he died Catholic, he went through a pretty heavy Buddhism phase.
What's it called, the Dharma?
Dharma, D-H-A, oh, yeah, excuse me, I'm going too fast.
Dharma.
Here. Dharma, it was, it's a Buddhist term.
Right.
So he wrote novels like On the Road, The Dharma Bums, Desolation Angels, a number of books like that. Mm-hmm. He was able to get them published after On the Road came out. Mm-hmm. So back to what I was saying, he had his road. The road novels were about his travels here and there, trying to sort of capture what was happening in America in the late 1950s, and then his Lowell novels. You can divide them into two categories. As is the case with a number of writers, his works were not really, even though On the Road got him on the bestseller list. By the time he died in 1969, very unfortunately, he had serious problems with alcohol. And so he died at the age of 47 in St. Petersburg, Florida. But he's buried in Lowell. He's buried in Lowell.
Did he have a family of his own?
He had a very little family. He's buried in Lowell. Like I said, he was living with his third wife and mother, who was still alive at the time of his death. But he's buried. He is buried in Lowell. People come and visit his grave constantly, and sort of my connection there is I am now the president and have been involved with an organization for years called Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, and we put on an annual Jack Kerouac Festival every year to kind of celebrate, honor his life and literary legacy. People come from all over the United States to take part in it. And then, as you were indicating there, this is the centennial year of his birth. So we are anticipating a bigger than usual festival this year. It'll run from October 6th through 10th over in Lowell. So to answer your questions about the books, Kerouac's Nashua Connection was a book I wrote. It was almost 30 years ago. 30 years ago now. And the way that book came to be written, I began to notice in those Lowell-based novels of his that we were just talking about. He kept making references to his families in Nashua. My uncles and my aunts lived in Nashua, so I began to wonder, well, who are these people? And as I said, he's the descendant of French-Canadian immigrants. His parents were both brought from Quebec to Nashua when they were infants. They grew up, they got married there. His father, Leo Kerouac, just happened to get a job in Lowell, which is why he ended up in Lowell. All the rest of his family stayed in Nashua. So I just what started out as just a little research project to figure out who Kerouac's ancestors, relatives were in Lowell. Kind of, I called it a research paper that got out of hand.
Well, this is his parents, Leo and Gabrielle.
His parents are Leo and Gabrielle. He had a brother, Gerard, who unfortunately died when the brother was 9 and Jack was only 4. He had one daughter from a marriage. I think it was his second marriage. Whose ashes are also interred there at
Jan
Michelle Kerouac. Yeah, they're all.
She was his granddaughter.
She was his daughter from his second marriage.
And this was written 20 years ago, Steve?
At least, maybe more.
This is in great shape. The Nashua Connection, Kerouac.
Well, you can tell the picture of me on the back looks like I looked about 20 or 30 years.
I would know who you were.
When I had a head of hair.
I would know. There's no doubt who the face is. And then the beat face of God, the Beat Generation writers as spirit guides. I haven't seen this before, but different people contributed to this?
Well, I wrote the book. What I did was, once I got more involved with, once I really began to study Kerouac's writings kind of in depth, to get a better sense of who he was and what he was about, and who some of his writing compatriots and companions were during that time. I decided that for some of the really wild and crazy stuff that went on in his life and some of the other lives of the people that he was writing about, I decided they were at base religious writers in the sense that they were searching for some kind of a deeper meaning and purpose to their lives above and beyond the kind of day-to-day life that we all live. And so there's several chapters in there on Jack Kerouac. There's also, I think there's one on Allen Ginsberg, one on William Burroughs, one on West Coast poet Lawrence Ferlinghetti. I just took different writers who were associated with the quote-unquote Beat Generation and decided what I could flesh out, if you will,
Right.
of some of the religious and spiritual themes in their writings. Like I said about Kerouac, he was born into a Catholic family. He was baptized Catholic, raised Catholic. In the early 1950s, he discovered Buddhism and went into a very strong Buddhist phase for a while. That's what his novel, The Dharma Bums, is really based about. Toward the latter part of his life, he found himself kind of returning to the Catholicism of his roots, so that when he died, he was given a full Catholic mass and burial in Lowell. He died in October of 1969.
One of the chapters is Gerard. Right?
Mhm.
Yeah, Gerard. The Buddha and Jesus Christ. Just like you said, he was very much involved in that. He was. It seems like he was searching for the way. You know?
Sure, he was. And the reference there, Gerard is an older brother of Jack's who died when Gerard was only 9 years old and Jack was 4. And what happened in there, and I've talked with families who have had a kid die in the family and the effect that has on the siblings.
Yeah.
Now, what happened with Jack? He was 4 years old when his brother Gerard died. So he grew up hearing about what happened when, and this is not unusual, when his brother Gerard died. His brother kind of becomes a saint in that family. He becomes beatified. He becomes the perfect child.
Yeah.
So Jack grows up with his family. They're in Lowell, and he had an older sister. Mm-hmm. He grows up hearing about what a perfect child Gerard was.
Oh.
The comparison being, and you're not. And you're not.
Yeah.
So the way he came to terms with all that was in 1956, he wrote a novel called Visions of Gerard, in which he's trying to writing about his brother, and he's trying to come to terms with what the death of his brother meant for him. Now, the way that the title you read there, he wrote Visions of Gerard when he was kind of at the height of his Buddhist phase, but he's still holding on to his Catholicism.
Oh, yeah.
So what's going on, what I write about in that chapter is how he projects both his Catholicism and his Buddhism onto the image of his older brother Gerard. What was the title again? Gerard. Something about Gerard.
The beat face of God. Oh, the name.
I should know the title.
The name was in chapter 11. Gerard Kerouac.
Right. Gerard.
The Buddha and Jesus Christ.
Oh, the Buddha and Jesus Christ. Yeah. What Kerouac is doing in that chapter, in addition to just trying to come to terms with the effect that his brother's death has had upon him all of his life, is to he sees both Jesus and the Buddha in his brother.
Yeah.
So he's putting that into his brother. That's just one of many religious, spiritual themes that I see in the writings of Kerouac. Now, there's an updated, if I can get in a little commercial here, there's an updated rewrite of that chapter in a book I have coming out next year, early part of next year, which is called The Gospel According to Jack.
That sounds about right.
The Gospel According to Jack.
Yeah.
And so I've done, it's got about 12 chapters. And what I'm doing in Gospel According to Jack, maybe you can have me back here about a year from now if you want to talk about that one. What I did was, I thought, what if I were going to do, I try to bring my minister life and my Kerouac life together in this book I have coming out next year. Did you used to preach
about Jack?
I would work him into a sermon now and then. Didn't want to overdo it because I didn't know how much the congregation really wanted to hear about Kerouac.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't even know. Yeah.
Anyway, what I'm doing in my next book is I thought, well, what if I were going to do a series of homilies, meditations, sermons on the writings of Kerouac and use passages from his writings as my quote-unquote scripture instead of a more traditional passage.
What do you think? Do you think he would do that?
But such a,
do you think he would do that? Want to do that?
Well, I could do it. I don't know if he would do it or not, but that's what I do with the book. So basically, that's what it is. And one of the chapters in the Gospel According to Jack book is kind of an updated rewrite of the chapter you were just asking me about, because I've discovered some more things about, since I wrote that book, I've discovered some more things about Kerouac's life. I've discovered some more things about the impact of the death of his brother on him that I didn't know I didn't even know when I wrote that book. So I'm kind of doing an update on that one.
We're talking with Steve Edington, and he is the author of The Beat Face of God, and there's another one coming out. When do you think it'll be out? It's
supposed to be out, they say, the outfit who's publishing it said the first quarter of 2023. So that means either January, February, or March of 2023.
How can they get a hold of your book?
If they want to, best way is just to email me, and it's all lowercase, REVSDE. The REV is for Reverend, SDE, Steve, Don, my middle name, Edington. All lowercase, REVSDE @hotmail.com. If you email me, I've got the Nashua Connection book is out of print. I might bring it back at some point, but I've got still got a pretty decent supply of the Beat Face of God books that people would like to.
Can they also get your Kerouac, the connection?
The Kerouac Nashua Connection. I think if you go to something like Amazon, they can probably put you in touch with people who still have copies that are selling them. Unfortunately, I've only got 2 copies left for me.
You must have sold what?
I managed to. Well, I self-published the Kerouac Nashua Connection, and once I sold off the copies I had, I didn't order. I haven't ordered any more. Beat Face of God is published by what's called a print-on-demand outfit, which is Trafford Publishing. They will also, if you contact them, or if you just go to Amazon and do a search for the Beat Face of God, you can order it that way.
Sure.
Of course, if it's better for me if you order it directly from me, which is why I gave you the email. Which is why I gave you the email address there a few minutes ago.
Steve is also, he's retired now, the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Nashua. And let me see, you're a member of the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Committee. That's coming up, right?
Yeah.
At the University of Massachusetts at Lowell.
Yeah.
And his previous book, we talk about this, Kerouac's Nashua Connection. And he's also a contributing writer for Beat Scene magazine. Is that still around?
It's published in London. It is still around.
That's why. Okay.
I haven't written about it for a while yet.
Yeah.
But the organization you just mentioned, and I just said, if I'd like people to take a look at that too. If you just go to the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac website, which is very easy to read. Lowell CelebrateSkerouac.org. And among other things you'll find there is the description of the Kerouac Festival we have coming up, which this year is October 6th through 10th. It's also going to be the grand finale of the Jack Kerouac Centennial, which we kicked off back on March the 12th, which was his actual 100th birthday. So be glad to have anybody who wants to come to Lowell and learn more about Jack and see how he is now acknowledged and celebrated in his hometown in ways that was not always the case. But
he wasn't always well liked?
He wasn't always well liked.
Yeah.
He was. Sometimes it takes a while for a writer's hometown to truly embrace him. Well, unfortunately, the tragic part of Kerouac's life, as I mentioned earlier, was his alcoholism.
This book, I love this. It says, Reverend Edington, and he was a reverend, shines a brilliant light into the psyches of those associated with the so-called Beat generation by clarifying the motivations that drove them with his unique and fascinating revelations. That's a nice review.
And that's very nice to be.
That was by Carolyn Cassidy, and she is the author of Off the Road, My Years with... So she wrote one, too.
Yeah.
She wrote one, My Years with Cassidy, Kerouac, and Ginsberg. Have you met Carolyn?
Yeah, Carolyn. Well, she passed away several years ago. Carolyn Cassidy, for those who are familiar with Kerouac's life or writing, Carolyn Cassidy was the wife of a man named Neil Cassidy, who was one of the major influences upon Kerouac's writings. Mm-hmm. For those who have read On the Road, Neil Cassidy is the person that Jack Kerouac bases the character of Dean Moriarty on. So Carolyn Cassidy, she was very close to Jack. She knew a lot of his friends, companions, including Allen Ginsberg.
Yeah.
And so she wrote her own memoir some time ago about that. And I was very honored to get to know her as I was working on that book. Yeah. So she gave me the blurb that you just...
she did a good job.
She gave me the blurb that you just read, yeah.
And what is this? David Amram.
Amram, yeah.
Author of Vibrations Offbeat, collaborating with Kerouac. He gave you a good...
yeah.
I'm glad that he did that.
David's a good friend. David is he's still 93 years old, still lives in Beacon, New York.
Just a kid.
Comes up every year for our Kerouac festivals.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a jazz composer and musician. He actually wrote, David Amram, in addition to being a good jazz man, he also wrote the musical scores to the original film versions of Splendor in the Grass and The Manchurian Candidate. Very well known. Yeah. But he was one of the few people who still have a pulse, who knew Jack Kerouac back in the day.
And your mom, was she familiar? Now, she's still alive at 96 years young, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And she's doing well, right?
She's doing well. Yeah, my mother, well, she knows about Kerouac through me because, like a good mom, she reads the books her son
she
writes.
does. Okay, so
and so, no, my mother was, as we were saying before we went on the air here, my mother was was a British war bride, Second World War. Met my dad, who was from southern West Virginia, when he was stationed on a Navy base near Plymouth, England, which is where I was born in August of 1945. So yeah, my mother, bless her soul, is still living on her own, independently, 96 years old. One of my three sisters lives about a block away from her, which is why I feel okay about how she's
And you're the
living on
oldest
her
of
own.
all the siblings.
I'm the oldest. I have three sisters, all younger than I am.
Oh, well, you were the protective brother, right?
I guess so. Well, they might not tell you that if you asked them, but I'd like to
Yeah.
think I was anyway.
Yeah, I know that works.
Yeah.
We are talking with Stephen Edington, and he has written The Beat Face of God. And also, maybe you could pick up this, I don't know, Kerouac's Nashua connection. Jack Kerouac's, finally, you did a lot of work went into this research you did.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get this done?
It was that one took a couple of years worth of digging around. Although fortunately the material I wanted was pretty close by.
Yeah.
As I said, when I read Jack's Lowell-based novels and
Yeah.
saw all these references to aunts, uncles, and cousins
Yeah.
who lived in Nashua, first I went to the Nashua City directories to see if I could find any Kerouac references. Because the way he came here was his grandfather in 1890 emigrated from a little town up in Quebec called Saint Hubert, brought his family to Nashua. The youngest of the kids that he and his wife brought were a baby called Leo. That was the one who grew up to become Jack's
It's on the
father.
gravestone right here.
Yeah. So as I found out who these people were, fortunately, I would go to the main church in the church in Nashua where most of the Catholics were members.
Yeah.
Where most of the Kerouacs were members was the St. Louis Gonzague Church. They gave me access to their birth, marriage, death records. I went up to Concord to the Bureau of Vital Records and was able to dig through. Anyway, once I figured out who all these people were and how they were related to one another and how they were related to Jack Kerouac, then I was able to put that book
so
together.
Jack himself is buried in Lowell.
He's buried in Lowell. Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of surprised he didn't get on the family tombstone.
Well, he's buried in Lowell. His third wife, his name was Stella Sampas, who took very good care of him during his waning years. So when he passed away, he was her husband. So she arranged for him to be buried in the Sampas.
Makes sense.
In the Sampas family plot in Lowell, and it makes sense, and it's also people who come from all over the place just to want to visit Jack Kerouac's grave. There's an iconic picture of Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg sitting at Jack Kerouac's grave in Lowell way back when Dylan was on his Rolling Thunder tour in the 1970s. So people come from all over the place. It's much more accessible than if it were in Nashua, where it's just about 15-20 miles north of Lowell. If I can just tell one quick story on that. It was in the late 1990s when the daughter Jan Kerouac, she unfortunately passed away at a fairly early age too. She was making some inquiries to the people in Lowell as to whether she could have Jack his grave removed from Lowell and brought up to Nashua to be buried with his.
How'd that go over?
It didn't. It never happened.
You know.
And it was kind of funny because that was all going on right at the same time that I was doing my research for the book, and I knew the priest at the cemetery, the St. Louis de Gonzague Church, which is the cemetery where they're buried. And I asked him. I said, "What do you think about this Jack's daughter trying to get her father basically exhumed and reburied in Nashua?" And his name, Father Cody.
Was there room for him though? Sometimes.
Well, that's what he said. He said, but the St. Louis is the cemetery where Jack's buried in Lowell is a public cemetery, the Edson Cemetery. This is a private Catholic cemetery where the other Kerouacs are buried. He would have qualified, but what he said to me was interesting. I said, "Well, Father, how do you feel about it? What if the daughter is successful?" And he says, "Well, if she's successful, he's entitled to be buried there. It's his family plot. We would do what we have to do to do it." And then he went on to say, he says, "But I'm just as glad he's buried in Lowell."
He was prejudiced against Jack?
Not prejudiced Jack. No, it's for practical reasons. He said the reason I'm glad he's buried in Lowell at a public cemetery that's being people can come and go. Basically, what he was saying was, as much as he admired, he didn't want. He didn't want a Kerouac pilgrimage coming through this private cemetery all the time. It's much better. It works much better for the people who want to come and pay their tribute, to pay
Yeah.
their respects to Jack Kerouac, to be able to go to his grave in a public cemetery in Lowell than to go up to Nashua and
Yeah.
try to find their way through a private Catholic cemetery.
Was Jack Kerouac, Stephen, was Jack Kerouac well known? I only remember a name. Of course, I was a little tot when he was going strong.
Mhm.
I know I'd heard the name growing up or somewhere. I don't know. Was he real popular within a certain time frame?
Within a certain time frame, right after On the Road came out
Yeah.
in 1957, and actually got onto some of the bestseller lists, and then some of his other novels began to sell. But unfortunately, sometime starting in the early to late 1960s, he just kind of went on to kind of a decline. Some of it fueled by his
The alcoholism.
by his alcoholism, and
Yeah.
he kind of faded from the public view. So by the time he died, a number of his novels had already gone out of print.
Yeah.
Well, and he spent although he died in Florida, he spent his sort of what you call his declining years in Lowell,
Yeah.
and unfortunately did some pretty heavy drinking around town, so he wasn't particularly well regarded. People in Lowell who only saw him as this sort of
Sure.
drunken guy wandering around town weren't aware of his literary
Yeah.
accomplishments.
Yeah.
And so it took the city of Lowell a while to really come around to recognizing him, which they did. There is now downtown Lowell, there's what's called the Jack Kerouac Commemorative. It's all these sort of high marble panels with passages from his
Like in a town
writings on
common?
them.
Is that the type of thing?
Is it what?
In a town common?
It's in what's called the canal. It was in what used to be called the Eastern Canal Park. Now it's called Kerouac Park. There's a Kerouac Park
That's
in Lowell
good.
with
Yeah.
these marble kind of obelisks with his inscriptions from his writings on. But it took Lowell quite a while,
Yeah.
and that's not unusual. There are other
Yeah,
towns
right.
that take them a while to do that. And that was, if I can just get, that was why it was building the Kerouac Commemorative, which got the organization Lowell Celebrates Kerouac started. And that's why I feel very kind of privileged to be a part of that.
Stephen, are you going to be leaving or doing these books downstairs at the Uptown Library at the local?
Well,
the local authors section is dedicated.
Okay, I tell you what, I can leave Beat Face of God
Okay.
since that's the only copy I have
Okay,
of that one, so I
right.
better take it with
One
me.
of the two left, right?
Yeah, but you can keep the Beat Face of God here too. Yeah.
You can put a neat little. Did you want to have this go along with it so people catch on more about you too, right?
Well,
Or
what's
you
in
want
there?
to
Why don't you leave that in there? That's
Sure.
just a list
Okay.
of the places in Lowell when I lead tours of the Kerouac places
All right.
of Lowell. That's a list of the places we visit. Sure, I'll be glad to leave that and a list of the sites. I should since I've only got one or two of these books left, I better take that one with me.
The Beat Face of God by Stephen Edington, retired minister of the Universal Unitarian Church up in Nashua, New Hampshire. Thank you for coming here.
Hey, it's been fun.
And the next one is coming out maybe next year.
Yeah, the Gospel According to Jack will be out next year. So
We'll get him back on.
there we go.
Thanks, and have
Thank
a
you.
safe trip back. We'll see you next time and be my guest.
Riding on a shooting star, heading out toward a dream. Tomorrow's even closer than it seems.